Don't worry, I'll handle the paperwork. Those were the words Diane whispered to me at my father's funeral, her hand resting on my shoulder as I stared at his casket. I'm Jeffrey, 49 years old. Been married to Diane for 12 years, working as a maintenance supervisor at North Peak Engineering here in Denver. My father had just died after a long battle with cancer, leaving me an inheritance of $800,000 from the sale of his ranch in Montana. I should have been grateful for her offer to help. I was drowning in grief, barely able to think straight. The funeral arrangements, the endless phone calls from relatives, the paperwork that seemed to multiply every day. Diane stepped in like she always did when things got overwhelming. She was good with numbers, worked as an accountant at Hollowgate Systems downtown. It made sense for her to handle the legal stuff while I tried to process losing the only parent I had left. But something felt off about the way she said it. Maybe it was how quickly she volunteered or how her fingers drummed against my shoulder when she spoke. Maybe it was the way she avoided looking me in the eye when she mentioned the inheritance lawyer's office. I'd noticed little things about Diane over the past year that didn't sit right. New clothes that seemed expensive for our budget. Cash withdrawals that she brushed off when I asked. Phone calls she'd take in the other room, speaking in hushed tones. I told myself I was being paranoid. Grief does strange things to your mind. Makes you suspicious of everyone, even the people closest to you. Diane had been nothing but supportive during my father's illness. She drove me to the hospital when I was too emotional to function. She coordinated with the hospice nurses. She held me when I cried. You focus on healing, she said that night as we sat in our kitchen, the funeral program still folded in my jacket pocket. I'll take care of everything else. I nodded and squeezed her hand. Thank you. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That's what wives are for. 3 weeks later, I was cleaning out my father's desk when I found his copy of the will. The inheritance was supposed to be straightforward. $800,000, transferred directly to Jeffrey Thomas Mitchell upon completion of the estate proceedings. I ran my finger over my father's signature, remembering how proud he'd been of that ranch, how he'd worked his whole life to build something worth passing down. I called Diane at work to ask about the timeline for receiving the funds. Her secretary said she was in a meeting. She didn't call me back that day, which was unusual. When she came home, she seemed distracted, almost irritated when I brought up the inheritance. These things take time, she said, not looking up from her phone. You can't rush the legal system. Something cold settled in my stomach, but I pushed it down. I'd met Diane at a company barbecue 13 years ago. She was smart, ambitious, and had this way of making me feel like I mattered. I was a simple maintenance guy, fixing boilers and electrical systems, getting my hands dirty while she worked with spreadsheets and client accounts. She made me feel like more than just a guy with a wrench. My father liked her, though he'd made a comment once that stuck with me. She's got expensive taste for someone dating a maintenance man, he'd said after she'd mentioned wanting to vacation in Europe. I'd defended her then, said she worked hard and deserved nice things. But the comment nagged at me. Our marriage had been solid for the first 8 years. We bought a modest house in Aurora, talked about kids, planned for retirement. Diane was always the one who handled our finances. She said I was too trusting, too likely to get taken advantage of. You're a good man, Jeffrey, she'd say, but you need someone to protect you from people who might use that goodness. The changes started about 2 years ago, right around the time she got promoted to senior accountant. New jewelry she claimed was costume but looked real. Designer purses she said were gifts from her sister. Weekend trips with girlfriends that seemed frequent and expensive. When I asked about our budget, she'd show me spreadsheets that looked professional but felt vague. We're fine, she'd say. I've got everything under control. My father's illness had consumed the last year of our marriage. Between work and hospital visits, I barely had energy to notice much else. Diane handled the bills, managed our accounts, coordinated with insurance companies. I was grateful then. She seemed to thrive on the organization, the responsibility. But there were moments that felt wrong. Phone calls where she'd mention moving money between accounts. Conversations with her sister about investment opportunities. The way she'd quickly close her laptop when I walked into the room. 2 months after the funeral, I still hadn't seen a penny of the inheritance. Diane kept saying the lawyers were slow, that these things took 6 months or more to process. But when I called my father's attorney directly, his secretary said the estate had been settled weeks ago. The funds were transferred according to the beneficiary instructions, she told me. Everything should be complete. That night I asked Diane directly about the status of the inheritance. She was doing dishes, her back to me, and I watched her shoulders tense when I spoke. "It's complicated," she said without turning around. "There are tax implications we need to resolve first." "What kind of tax implications?" She dried her hands slowly, still not facing me. "Jeffrey, you need to trust me on this. I know what I'm doing." But for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't sure I did trust her. The truth hit me on a Tuesday morning in March, 4 months after my father died. I was cleaning out our home office, looking for my passport to renew it, when I found a folder wedged behind Diane's filing cabinet. Inside were bank statements for an account I'd never seen before. An account in her name only, with a balance of $800,000. The deposit date matched exactly with when my father's estate should have been settled. I sat in that chair for an hour, staring at the papers. My hand shook as I read through the documents. She'd transferred the inheritance to herself by forging my signature on beneficiary forms. My father's life savings, everything he'd worked for, stolen by the woman I'd trusted most. But it wasn't just the money, it was the months of lies. The way she'd comforted me while she was robbing me. The gentle touches and reassuring words while she systematically erased my future. When Diane came home that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the bank statements spread in front of me. She walked in chatting about her day, then stopped when she saw the papers. Her face went completely blank for a moment. Then she smiled. "Oh," she said, setting down her purse. "You found those. $800,000, Diane, my father's inheritance." She pulled out a chair and sat across from me like we were discussing dinner plans. "Jeffrey, you would have just wasted it anyway. You don't understand money like I do. You would have put it in some basic savings account, earning nothing, while I can invest it properly." The casualness of it hit me harder than anger would have. She wasn't even trying to deny it or explain it away. She was proud of it. Wasted it on what? Paying off our mortgage? Planning for retirement? "You're too emotional to make good financial decisions. You proved that when your father was sick, spending money on expensive treatments that didn't even work." She leaned back in her chair. "I'm protecting us. I'm protecting you." I looked at my wife of 12 years and realized I was staring at a stranger, someone who could comfort me at a funeral while planning to rob me, someone who could twist theft into care. "This money belongs to me, Diane. Legally, it belongs to whoever's name is on the account." She tapped the bank statement. "That would be me." I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. "I see." "Don't be dramatic, Jeffrey. We're married. What's mine is yours anyway." "Then why isn't my name on the account?" For the first time, her smile faltered slightly. "Because you can't be trusted not to do something stupid with it." I nodded and walked to my truck. I sat in the driveway until after midnight, not thinking about the money, but about the woman who'd stolen it. And slowly, very carefully, I began to plan. The next morning I called a lawyer. Not my father's estate attorney, but a divorce lawyer named Patricia Stevens, who'd been recommended by a co-worker whose brother had gone through a messy separation. "The problem," she explained during our consultation, "is proving the money was stolen. If she forged documents to transfer the inheritance, we'd need evidence of the forgery. Without that, it looks like a marital asset that she managed on your behalf. But it was my father's money, meant for me, which you'll need to prove in court against someone who clearly understands how to manipulate financial documents." Patricia folded her hands on her desk. "Do you have any evidence that your wife has committed other financial crimes? Pattern of behavior? Anything that might support a claim of fraud?" I thought about the expensive clothes, the cash withdrawals, the secretive phone calls. "I have suspicions, but nothing concrete." "Suspicions won't hold up in court, Mr. Mitchell. You need documentation." That afternoon, I confronted Diane directly. I told her I'd spoken to a lawyer, that I intended to fight for what was rightfully mine. She listened without interruption, her expression growing colder with each word. When I finished, she set down her coffee cup and smiled that same empty smile from the night before. "Go ahead," she said. "Sue me. Spend whatever money you have left on lawyers trying to prove something you can't prove. By the time you're finished, we'll both be broke, and you'll have destroyed our marriage over money that I'm already investing for our future." "Our future? The account is in your name only." "Because I understand finance and you don't. When you're ready to apologize for this tantrum, we can discuss adding your name to the account." She stood up and kissed my forehead like I was a child. "But I'm not giving you access to $800,000 so you can throw it away on trucks and tools and whatever other toys you think you need." That night, she moved into the guest bedroom. "Until you come to your senses," she said. 2 weeks later, I tried a different approach. I went to the bank where she'd opened the secret account, hoping to get information about the transfer. The manager, a polite woman in her 50s, explained that they couldn't discuss account details with unauthorized parties. "Even though it's my inheritance money?" "I understand your frustration, Mr. Mitchell, but without proper documentation or a court order, I can't help you." I left the bank feeling defeated. Diane was right about one thing. She understood the system better than I did. She'd covered her tracks professionally, legally. Every move she'd made was technically within her rights as my spouse managing our finances. That evening, Diane was cooking dinner when I came home. She looked up from the stove with what almost seemed like genuine concern. "Jeffrey, this has gone on long enough. You're making yourself sick over this. You stole $800,000 from me. I secured $800,000 for us. There's a difference." She turned back to stirring the pasta sauce. "I've already made $12,000 in returns on the investments. At this rate, we'll have over $1 million within 5 years. And what if you decide to leave? What happens to that money then?" She paused, the spoon halfway to her mouth for tasting. "Why would I leave?" "You tell me, Diane. You're the one sleeping in the guest room." She set down the spoon and turned to face me fully. "I'm sleeping in the guest room because you're accusing me of being a thief. When you're ready to trust me again, I'll come back to our bed." But something in her eyes told me she was already gone. Had been gone for longer than I wanted to admit. I started paying attention to things I'd ignored for too long. Diane left for work every morning at 8:30, but some days she didn't come home until after 7. When I asked about the long hours, she'd mention client meetings or month-end reconciliations. But when I called her office one afternoon, her secretary said she'd left at 4. I began tracking her movements, not to catch her cheating, but to understand what else she might be hiding. If she could steal my inheritance so casually, what other secrets was she keeping? 3 weeks into my surveillance, I followed her to a shopping center in Highlands Ranch. Instead of going into any of the stores, she met a man in his 60s at a coffee shop. They sat in the back corner, their conversation intense and quiet. The man had papers spread on the table between them, and I watched Diane sign several documents. I took pictures from across the parking lot, then waited until they separated. The man drove a Mercedes with dealership plates. I wrote down the license number. That night, I searched through Diane's computer while she was in the shower. Her browser history showed frequent visits to investment sites, but also searches for asset protection, offshore accounts, and statute of limitations fraud. The next day, I used a vacation day to visit her office building. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I wanted to see where she worked, to understand her daily environment better. The lobby directory listed Hollowgate Systems on the 14th floor. I took the elevator up and walked past their reception area, pretending to be lost. Through the glass doors, I could see a busy accounting office, people working at computers, normal business activity. A receptionist approached and asked if I needed help finding something. "I'm looking for Diane Mitchell," I said. "She's expecting me." The receptionist checked her computer, then frowned. "I'm sorry, but we don't have anyone by that name working here. She's in accounting, senior accountant. I've been here 4 years, sir. There's no Diane Mitchell in our accounting department." I felt the blood drain from my face. Could she be using her maiden name, Diane Walker? No, sir. No Diane Walker either. I mumbled an apology and left, my mind racing. If Diane didn't work at Hollowgate Systems, where did she go every day? How had she been earning a salary for the past 2 years? That evening, I waited until she was asleep, then searched through her purse. Her wallet contained business cards for several financial planning companies, but no employee identification for Hollowgate Systems. Instead, I found a card identifying her as a senior investment consultant for a company called Crimson Harbor Group. I'd never heard of Crimson Harbor Group. The next morning, I called their offices. The receptionist confirmed that Diane Mitchell worked there, but when I asked to speak with her, she said Diane was out meeting with clients. What type of clients? Mr. Mitchell, I can't discuss employee activities with unauthorized callers. I hung up and drove to the address on the business card. Crimson Harbor Group occupied a small office in a strip mall, the kind of place that rents month to month. Through the window, I could see a few desks, a couple of computers, and motivational posters about wealth building. It looked like a scam operation. That night, I confronted Diane about her real job. She was reading in bed when I showed her the business card I'd found. What is Crimson Harbor Group? She looked at the card, then at me. It's a financial consulting firm. You told me you worked at Hollowgate Systems. I work with multiple companies. Crimson Harbor is a consulting contract. But her voice had that same empty quality as when she'd explained stealing my inheritance. I was getting good at recognizing when Diane was lying. I hired a private investigator. Patricia Stevens had given me the name of someone who specialized in financial fraud cases. His name was Vincent Torres, a former police detective who now worked primarily for divorce attorneys tracking hidden assets. Your wife is running some kind of investment scam, he told me after a week of investigation. Crimson Harbor Group targets elderly clients, promises high returns on bogus investments. She's been doing this for at least 18 months. He showed me photos of Diane meeting with various elderly people at restaurants and coffee shops. Always well-dressed seniors, always carrying folders full of paperwork. How much money is she stealing? Hard to say without access to her records, but based on the client list we've identified, probably over $200,000 so far. 200,000? That we know about. Could be more. Vincent leaned back in his chair. The good news is that this gives you leverage. Financial fraud is a federal crime. She's looking at serious prison time if this gets reported. I want my inheritance back first. Understandable. But Mr. Mitchell, this woman is a career criminal. She's not going to just hand over $800,000 because you ask nicely. That night, I began documenting everything. I made copies of the bank statements I'd found, printed out the photos from my phone, wrote down dates and times of her suspicious activities. I created a timeline showing how her investment scam had started right around the time she got access to elderly client information through her legitimate accounting work. 2 days later, Vincent called with an update. We've identified at least 12 victims, maybe more. One of them is a World War II veteran named Albert Harrison. She convinced him to liquidate his entire pension fund, told him she could double his money in 6 months. How much? $87,000. His life savings. I felt sick. Diane hadn't just stolen from me. She'd been systematically robbing elderly people, probably while comforting them the same way she'd comforted me at my father's funeral. There's something else, Vincent continued. She's been using your name and social security number to open business accounts. If this gets investigated by federal authorities, they're going to look at you as a potential co-conspirator. What? She's listed you as a business partner on several financial documents, made it look like you're involved in the investment operation. I understood now why she'd been so casual about my threats to sue her. If I exposed her theft of my inheritance, I'd expose myself as an alleged partner in her fraud scheme. She'd protected herself by implicating me. But Vincent had also given me the weapon I needed. Over the next 3 weeks, I gathered evidence methodically. I recorded phone conversations where Diane discussed her investments. I collected documents showing how she'd forged my signature on business filings. I interviewed 2 of her elderly victims who described exactly how she'd convinced them to trust her with their retirement savings. Most importantly, I documented how she'd stolen my inheritance while actively running her investment scam, proving that the $800,000 was being used to fund her criminal operation. On a Thursday evening in late April, 6 months after my father's funeral, I sat down at the kitchen table with everything I'd collected: bank records, photographs, recorded conversations, victim statements, and business documents showing how she'd used my identity without permission. When Diane came home, I was waiting for her with a sealed envelope. "What's that?" she asked, setting down her purse. "Something you need to read." She looked at the envelope, then at my face. For the first time since I'd known her, Diane looked uncertain. Diane's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside were photographs of her meetings with elderly clients, copies of forged business documents using my name, and bank records showing how my inheritance money had been used to fund her investment scam. "Where did you get these?" she whispered, her face going pale as she flipped through the evidence. "I've been documenting your crimes for the past 2 months," I said calmly. 12 victims so far, including an 87-year-old veteran who trusted you with his entire pension." She dropped the papers like they were burning her fingers. "Jeffrey, you don't understand what you're looking at." "I understand perfectly. You've been running an investment fraud operation, stealing money from elderly people, and you used my inheritance to fund it. You also forged my signature on business documents, making me an unwilling partner in federal crimes. This isn't what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit already has copies of everything in that envelope." That was a lie, but I watched her face crumble as she processed what I'd said. "You turned me into the FBI?" "Not yet, but I will unless you transfer my inheritance back to me immediately. All $800,000, plus whatever returns you've earned." She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "You're bluffing." I pulled out my phone and showed her the contact information for Special Agent Patricia Williams, FBI Financial Crimes Division. "One phone call, Diane. That's all it takes. If you report me, they'll investigate you too. Your name is on those business documents. Because you forged my signature, which is also a federal crime, and I have evidence proving I never consented to any business partnerships with you." She looked at the papers again, her hands shaking. "Jeffrey, we can work this out. We're married. We can figure something else out. Transfer the money back to my name and I'll give you 24 hours to disappear before I call the FBI." "And if I don't?" I stood up and walked to the landline phone mounted on the kitchen wall. "Then I make the call right now." The next morning, Diane was gone. She'd left during the night, taking only a suitcase and her car. On the kitchen counter, I found signed bank transfer documents returning the $800,000 to an account in my name, along with an additional $43,000 in investment returns. She also left behind a note. "I thought you were too weak to fight back. I was wrong." 3 days later, I received a call from Albert Harrison, the elderly veteran whose pension she'd stolen. Diane had returned his $87,000 through an anonymous bank transfer. Over the following week, all of her other victims received similar transfers, returning their stolen money with interest. She'd liquidated everything she'd stolen and given it back, then vanished completely. A month later, I learned why. Vincent Torres called to tell me that federal investigators had been tracking Crimson Harbor Group for 6 months as part of a larger financial fraud investigation. Diane had apparently realized that the FBI was closing in and decided to return the stolen money and run, rather than face prosecution. "She's probably in a non-extradition country by now," Vincent said. "Smart move, considering she was looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. I used my father's inheritance to pay off our mortgage and establish a scholarship fund in his name for students studying agricultural management. Every year I attend the award ceremony and think about how he'd worked his whole life to build something meaningful. Diane had thought she could steal everything he'd worked for and disappear with it. Instead, she'd lost everything and made his legacy stronger." 6 months after Diane fled, federal investigators closed the Crimson Harbor Group case when they discovered all victim funds had been returned with interest, though they issued a warrant for Diane Mitchell's arrest on charges of investment fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. Her professional accounting credentials were permanently revoked, her assets were frozen, and she was added to international financial crime databases that would prevent her from opening legitimate bank accounts anywhere. Social media posts from mutual friends revealed she was working under an assumed name as a waitress in a small Mexican coastal town, struggling financially and unable to return to the United States without facing immediate arrest. Her family had disowned her after learning about the elderly victims she'd targeted, and former colleagues reported her to professional licensing boards to ensure she could never work in finance again. The woman who'd thought she was smart enough to steal my father's legacy had ended up losing everything while making his memory stronger than she'd ever been.